Today, we remember 5 drivers whose lives were cut short on the track. Their tragedies changed motorsport forever, making racing safer. This is not just a ranking, it is a tribute to those who paid the ultimate price for speed. On May 1, 1994, Motorsport lost one of its most brilliant and enigmatic heroes, Ayrton Senna. At the San Marino Grand Prix in Imola, his Williams FW16 car suddenly lost control on the high-speed Tambello section of the track and crashed into a concrete barrier, an accident that shocked the world and raised many questions about the price of engineering experiments and human haste. Senna, a 3-time world champion, always demanded precision and maximum reliability from his team. He spoke openly about his concerns about the nervous car and the lack of space in the cockpit, and the mechanics, in an attempt to improve the fit, manually modified the steering column, lengthening it and changing its stiffness. This decision, made under pressure and with limited time, proved fatal. At the moment of collision, the structure suffered a critical fracture. Control was lost. The car was thrown into the barrier at high speed, and metal fragments penetrated the cockpit, causing fatal head injuries to the driver. Investigations and legal proceedings lasted for years. Experts agreed that a combination of a design flaw and extreme loads at maximum speeds created a situation in which even the driver's skill could not save the car and the man. The tragedy at Imola was a turning point for Formula One. The era when design changes could be announced in the paddock without comprehensive technical verification was over. Regulators tightened the rules for making modifications, strengthened the requirements for the strength of steering and suspension components, and initiated projects to strengthen cockpit protection and create deformation zones capable of absorbing impact energy. Tracks around the world have been redesigned. Dangerous sections have been given additional deceleration zones and more effective barriers, and technicians and drivers have begun to engage in a more open dialogue about risks and safety. An important consequence was that the voice of the drivers became an important element in the discussion of change. The drivers united and began to demand not only speed and victories, but also reliable protection for those who take to the starting line. Ayrton himself was a complex and contradictory man. He could be fiercely competitive and at the same time deeply humane. His passion for racing combined with a sense of social responsibility and sincere concern for the lives of people in the paddock. After Senna's death, the world saw not only the loss of talent, but also a chance to change the priorities of motorsport. Safety came to the fore, and many innovations that seemed too conservative at the time eventually saved the lives of other drivers. The memory of Senna remains in the hearts of fans and in the archives of racing history, but it has also become a living reminder to engineers and drivers that no victory or record is worth a human life, and that every technical detail must undergo rigorous testing and quality control. Today, years after those tragic days, many of the safety measures introduced in response to the Imola disaster are considered standard, and this legacy serves as a reminder that progress must be combined with caution, and that the pursuit of speed must go hand in hand with responsibility towards people. The months and years of investigation that followed revealed a chain of causes that included design flaws, operational risks, and human error, and each new report reinforced the understanding that safety must be systematic and continuous, rather than an episodic response to tragedies. This resulted in specific changes: mandatory certification of all modifications to steering and suspension equipment, tighter control over the quality of materials and welded joints, the introduction of uniform testing protocols for cyclic loads, requirements for the documentation and certification of any interventions in the controls and steering system, and stricter procedures for approving changes that could previously be made in the paddock without proper verification. Technical reports describe the failure mechanism in detail. The steering column joint and weld area was subject to fatigue failure under cyclic overload conditions, and manual modifications created stress concentrations in weakened areas, which at high speed led to instantaneous fracture and loss of control. These findings forced manufacturers to review their strength calculations, increase requirements for materials and joining methods, and introduce additional checks and fatigue endurance tests. The lengthy court cases and disputes were not only an attempt to establish responsibility, but also a source of lessons for the entire industry. Journalists, engineers, and representatives of the deceased driver's family discussed the causes and consequences, and international regulators introduced new standards designed to protect human life even in the pursuit of speed. The memory of Senna is reflected in memorials and in the public consciousness, but more importantly, his legacy lives on in modern safety rules and technologies. The emergence of improved protective frames, the redesign of cockpit geometry, the introduction of systems to limit the penetration of foreign objects into the driver's area, and the strengthening of quality control at all stages of production. All of this is part of what was born in response to the Imola tragedy. May the lessons of that day be learned forever, and may the memory of the great driver serve as motivation for the constant pursuit of making racing and car testing as safe as possible, because human life is worth more than any title or record. During test runs before the 24-hour Le Mans race in 1999, Japanese driver Marcus Hostran lost control of his Toyota GT1 car while exiting a high-speed corner, and what began as another practice lap ended in a disaster that shook the world of endurance racing and called into question the methods of designing and testing parts used at extremely high speeds. The rear wheel, manufactured experimentally and made from a material that had not undergone full fatigue testing, burst at a speed of 330 kilometers per hour, and the car, racing along a straight line and clinging to the thin line between traction and aerodynamic stability, suddenly lost its footing and was thrown into the barriers, with the impact so severe that the body literally burst into pieces, and the scattered structural elements penetrated the interior of the car, where deformation not designed for such loads turned several key components into dangerous sharp edges and debris. The consequences were instantaneous and brutal. The driver suffered fatal injuries, and the world of motorsport froze for a moment, realizing that even carefully prepared teams and millions of hours spent on design are not always able to predict the behavior of innovative materials in extreme conditions. Toyota engineers, forced to acknowledge the obvious, stated that the material used had not passed all the required cyclic tests, and that the manufacturing method had caused localized stress concentrations, leading to fatigue cracks under repeated load cycles. This admission marked the beginning of a thorough review of the company's safety protocols, because incidents of the magnitude of Le Mans do not tolerate half measures or gross simplifications, and the reputation of manufacturers, like the fate of people, is more valuable than any ambition to save time or money. Investigations revealed that the error was multifactorial, a combination of experimental material, insufficient quality control during manufacturing, and the lack of comprehensive fatigue and overload testing typical of long races created a chain of events in which each link amplified the danger of the previous one. Engineers began to examine each fragment in detail, conduct microanalyses, track the origin of defects, and document each step of production to eliminate the possibility of recurrence, while road and race regulators tightened certification requirements for car parts, especially for elements responsible for wheel and suspension grip and retention. Outwardly, the tragedy looked like the destruction of a car, but deeper down, it was a lesson in engineering ethics and responsibility. Any innovation requires time to be tested, and tests on test benches and in laboratories must simulate real load cycles on the track, where material fatigue can manifest itself over thousands of cycles and lead to disaster at an unexpected moment. After the incident, Toyota reviewed its quality control methods, introduced additional testing stages, tightened requirements for suppliers, updated protocols for approving new materials and technologies, and invested significant resources in research to predict the fatigue behavior of alloys and composites, which made it possible to avoid a number of potential risks in the development of high-speed cars in the future. The consequences for Le Mans and the world of endurance racing were significant. Organizers have tightened checks on experimental technology, introduced stricter test admission procedures and mandatory reports on key component manufacturing techniques, and teams have become more active in sharing their testing experience and material durability assessment techniques, recognizing that secrecy and confidentiality for the sake of competitive advantage can lead to tragedy. In addition to technical measures, there have also been changes in safety culture. Greater emphasis on openness, on the exchange of test data, on mandatory certification, and on the introduction of additional barriers and damping zones on the tracks to reduce the consequences of possible structural damage. For the driver's family and millions of Le Mans fans, this loss was a bitter reminder that racing remains dangerous and that the price of progress can sometimes be prohibitively high. At the same time, the tragedy prompted the industry to change, and a few years later, Toyota, having undergone a profound restructuring of its processes and completed extensive research, returned to the track with updated safety standards, no longer risking experimentation at the limits without appropriate confirmation of reliability. Today, the memory of that disaster remains part of Le Mans' history and a lesson for everyone who works with high speeds and innovative materials. Safety must come before ambition, and every innovation needs to be rigorously and consistently verified, because in the world of speed, the price of a mistake is measured not in lost time or money, but in human lives. This lesson, though learned through bloodshed, has helped to make racing a little safer and has shaped a new standard of responsibility towards drivers and spectators. Emergency services and doctors acted quickly on the track, But the scale of the destruction highlighted the need to review rescue procedures and medical center equipment. Legal proceedings led to tighter controls on suppliers and the introduction of mandatory audits, as well as a requirement for non-destructive testing of parts, including ultrasound and X-rays, verification of calculations using the finite element method, and the introduction of telemetric early warning systems became part of new standards that increased the predictability and reliability of designs. The memory of those who died is honored, and the lessons learned have formed the basis of educational programs for engineers, strengthening a culture of responsibility. On May 8, 1982, the world of motorsport suffered a heavy and long-remembered loss. Gilles Villeneuve, one of the most brilliant and beloved drivers of his generation, died on the Zolder circuit during qualifying for the Belgian Grand Prix. These events turned out to be a tragedy involving high speed, minimal technical tolerances, and a tragic accident. And the accident itself went down in history as a reminder that in those years, safety still lagged far behind the capabilities of the cars. At the wheel of his Ferrari, Gilles was driving in a dense stream of cars and trying to find a weak spot in the dense stream of participants to improve his position at the start. As he was overtaking Jochen Mass's car, there was contact that proved fatal. The right side of his car collided with the rear of his rival's car, causing Villeneuve's car to fly into the air, lose aerodynamic stability, and crash with tremendous force into the track's protective barrier and gravel trap. The cockpit and fairing panels could not withstand such an impact, and the driver suffered fatal injuries. Doctors who arrived at the scene provided first aid and evacuated him to the nearest clinic, but they were unable to save Gilles. The news of his death stunned fans, teams, and the entire racing world. Many people came to the track and to the television cameras, remembering the skill, daring, and charisma of the driver, who had always been true to the principles of aggressive and technical driving. The era in which Villeneuve lived and worked was different in that the safety of cars and trajectories had not yet reached the levels that later became the norm. The cars were lighter and more fragile, the protective barriers and gravel traps were less sophisticated, and the standards for testing and certifying components left more room for risk. The tragedy was followed by investigations and disputes about who was to blame for the collision. Some blamed Massa for a maneuver that unexpectedly shortened the trajectory, while others pointed to the density of the traffic and the fact that, in those conditions, any incomplete closure of the trajectory could have led to an accident. The analysis process included reviewing CCTV footage, interviewing witnesses, and examining the wreckage, and although public opinion was divided, the lessons were clear. The approach to safety needed to be changed urgently. Villeneuve's death was one of the catalysts for accelerating change. Organizers and regulators stepped up their efforts to improve barriers, increase gravel areas, design more stable chassis structures, and improve admission and qualification protocols. Teams began to pay more attention to the strength and reliability of components, and medical services at the tracks received additional resources and tools for emergency care. But beyond the technical measures, Villeneuve's tragedy left a noticeable mark on motorsport culture. His friends, colleagues, and rivals spoke of him as a man who drove at the limit, but did so with respect for skill and a vibrant personality. And after his departure, many young drivers began to think more about the balance between aggression and caution. Gilles' legend lived on after his death. His name remained in the memory of fans, and his image as a driver willing to take risks for victory inspired a new generation of drivers, including his son, who later continued the family racing dynasty. It was the memory of drivers like Villeneuve that forced the industry to emphasize that speed and spectacle should not be sacrificed for human life. Today, looking back on those years, we can see how many steps have been taken towards safety, and how much of this progress is due to the hard lessons of the past. Changes to track configurations, major changes to cockpit design, the introduction of stricter standards for materials and connections, improved emergency response and medical assistance systems. All this is part of a legacy that owes not only to technical development, but also to the memory of those who gave their lives on the track. The death of Gilles Villeneuve is not just an entry in the chronicle, it is a reminder of the price of speed and the need for constant attention to the protection of people in the world of motorsport. And his memory lives on in those who are working today to make racing exciting but not deadly. His career was short but brilliant. He became famous as a master of daring overtaking and a subtle feel for the limits of grip, and it was this combination that made him a favorite of the stands and a subject of respect among his colleagues. Fans remembered not only his victories, but also his human warmth, sincerity, and tendency to push technology to its limits. Shortly after the tragedy, mourning events and commemorative actions took place across Europe. Teams displayed black armbands, his name was remembered on the tracks, and reports and documentary projects kept the public's attention on the need for reform. Investigations and discussions of the work of regulators led to many testing and certification procedures becoming stricter, and the practice of engineers and drivers working together on safety issues gained new momentum. Educational programs began to include material on risks and engineering ethics, and mechanics and engineers began to exchange experiences and methodologies more frequently. His memory lives on in training programs and motorsport museums, where young engineers and drivers are clearly taught the price of risk. In 2007, an accident in Montreal caused the motorsport world to hold its breath and at the same time demonstrated that modern safety systems work. A BMW Sauber car driven by Robert Kubica crashed into a concrete barrier at high speed, overturned and, according to eyewitness accounts, practically fell apart, but the driver himself miraculously survived with a serious but not fatal leg injury. This incident was not only a shock to fans and participants in the championship, but also an important test for the engineering solutions and protective technologies developed in recent decades, as carbon fiber monocoques, crumple zones, seat mountings, helmets, and restraint systems, as well as the organization of rescue services, have proven their ability to save lives in extreme conditions. On that day, the track in Montreal became the scene of a severe test. On the straight, before sharp braking, the car suddenly lost control, possibly due to mechanical failure or loss of contact with the surface at high speed, and the car crashed into the safety barrier in such a way that the forces of the impact were transferred to the frame and external elements, which were designed to absorb the energy of the collision and dissipate it without destroying the vital spaces inside the cockpit. Telemetry data and subsequent technical investigations made it possible to reconstruct the events. The speed at the moment of impact was a value that had previously been considered practically incompatible with survival, but thanks to the fact that the engineers had focused on strength and deformation distribution, the structure was able to redistribute the momentum, and the rescue systems worked quickly and smoothly. The efficiency of the medical team was critical. The time it took for rescuers to reach the wreckage, extract the pilot, and begin stabilization determined the outcome of events. The quickly organized evacuation, preliminary diagnosis, and transport to the hospital minimized the consequences of the injury and gave him a chance at a full recovery and return to his professional career. For the family and team, this moment was a test of resilience and faith. Fear for the life of a loved one gave way to relief, and the need for long and difficult treatment required not only physical but also moral resources. The community, fans, and colleagues united in a wave of support, helping not only materially but also spiritually, because car accidents always carry with them the drama of human destinies. The consequences of the accident in terms of regulations and engineering were far-reaching. Teams reviewed their quality control procedures for components and assemblies, manufacturers tightened their requirements for testing suspension, steering, and braking systems, and regulators introduced additional checks before allowing cars to race. Standards for fatigue testing and assembly process verification were also strengthened, as even a single imperceptible microcrack could lead to disaster at speed. The event in Montreal was the starting point for a number of initiatives to improve safety. Developers focused not only on passive protection, but also on active accident prevention measures, telemetry, and early warning systems for thermal and mechanical instability, as well as on the further integration of materials capable of maintaining structural integrity under extreme loads. The impact of this accident is also felt in the educational sphere. Training programs for engineers and technicians have included case studies analyzing similar incidents, and testing methods have become more rigorous and comprehensive, requiring manufacturers and teams to be transparent and share data for the sake of overall safety. On a personal level, Robert Kubica has become a symbol of an incredible comeback. His story has shown that with modern medical care, professional rescue workers, and a well-designed car, it is possible to withstand impacts that previously seemed fatal and return to the track, proving that human will and technological progress can overcome tragedy. This incident prompted a rethinking of priorities in motorsport and served as a reminder that racing is not just a battle for seconds and titles, but also a responsibility to the people who get behind the wheel. That is why, after Montreal, efforts to improve safety became one of the main areas of development in the sport, bringing together engineers, doctors, regulators, and the drivers themselves in the search for a balance between spectacle and life. The memory of those moments remains in the chronicles and in the hearts of those who lived through that day, and the lessons learned at the cost of fear and pain continue to work to make motorsport safer, and to ensure that each new race confirms the price that humanity is willing to pay for speed, doing everything possible to ensure that fear remains only a memory and not a reality for future generations. An important consequence of this accident was not only the strengthening of technical standards, but also a profound change in the culture of risk perception. Engineering offices and design departments of teams developed the habit of modeling the limit states of materials and components in detail, introducing predictive control methods and not allowing parts that had not passed a full validation cycle to be tested. Race organizers reviewed emergency service scenarios, tightening requirements for medical facilities, working out evacuation and immediate transport scenarios for victims, and initiating joint exercises with local emergency services. Requirements for wheel fastening and suspension point strength were revised. Non-destructive testing methods became mandatory for component acceptance, and telemetry and sensors began to play an even greater role in the early detection of signs of material fatigue. As a result, the event in Montreal became not only a personal tragedy, but also a lesson for the entire industry, helping to shape a more responsible and technologically advanced face of racing, where safety and human life come first. In 2011, a tragedy occurred on the Las Vegas track that forever changed American racing and attitudes towards safety in open-wheel series. During the high-speed stage of the IndyCar series, a chain collision involving 15 cars occurred, and one of the cars bounced up, took an unfortunate trajectory, and crashed into the protective fence. Dane Weldon was thrown from his car and ejected from the track. The impact was fatal, but the scale of the destruction and the nature of the damage showed how difficult and dangerous the work of rescue workers on the track can be. Immediately after the accident, medical teams and rescue services rushed onto the track. Their work was coordinated and professional, but the severity of the accident and the numerous debris significantly complicated access to the victims. The investigation showed that the chain reaction began with a slight contact between the cars, but with the high traffic density and high speed, the domino effect intensified, turning a series of collisions into a catastrophe. An important detail was that the open wheels and trailer elements of the cars had the potential to turn into projectiles when destroyed, and it was these flying fragments that penetrated beyond the usual impact zones. After the tragedy, there was intense discussion about the configuration of the track, the width of the lanes, the distances between the protective sections, and the possibility of reducing the density of cars on the oval to lower the likelihood of such chain reactions. Organizers and regulators conducted large-scale tests of barriers and mesh fences to understand how to reduce the risk of protective elements being breached and limit the scattering of debris beyond the track. Particular attention was paid to cockpit protection and pilot restraint systems. Engineering teams began to work more actively on strengthening frames and creating additional screens and systems to prevent large objects from entering the pilot's area. To increase survivability, first aid procedures and medical station equipment standards were revised, and emergency response teams began to practice evacuation and treatment scenarios involving multiple injuries and scattered debris. The Las Vegas incident forced manufacturers to rethink wheel mounting methods and suspension design, as wheel detachment often caused additional and fatal damage during high-speed collisions. The response to the tragedy was not only technical but also cultural. There was a growing understanding in the paddock of the need to share information about risks and failures, which led to closer cooperation between teams and regulators. Numerous initiatives launched after that night included mandatory supplier audits, extended cyclic testing for critical components, and enhanced non-destructive testing during parts acceptance. In addition, the regulations for admission to oval races were revised. Restrictions were introduced on the number of participants in crowded stages, as well as requirements for minimum intervals between cars at starts and restarts. At the cockpit design level, development was accelerated on the installation of additional protective screens to filter debris trajectories, as well as on the reinforcement of carbon monocoques and their joints with the front and side sections. Specialists have also intensified work on the integration of telemetry, which allows anomalies to be detected in real time and the car's parameters to be automatically adjusted in the event of a loss of control. Another important area of focus was improving the design of barriers and gravel traps, introducing more effective dampers and modular systems capable of absorbing impact energy and preventing ricochets towards the stands and rescue areas. The public and fans reacted with mourning and support for the driver's family. Memorial events, flower-laying ceremonies, and tributes from colleagues appeared, and the memory of the deceased became an incentive for change. On the legal front, hearings and analysis of regulations followed, leading to stricter liability for organizers for track preparation and safety control of equipment at race venues. The result was a wave of reforms aimed at minimizing the likelihood of chain accidents and protecting drivers in the event of extreme damage to the car, which over time led to a noticeable reduction in fatalities in American racing. Today's safety standards in open-wheel series, including reinforced cockpits, improved barriers, and an advanced medical support system, all much to the lessons learned from that tragic night in Las Vegas. The memory of what happened remains a reminder of the price of mistakes and the need for constant vigilance. Engineers, managers, and doctors continue to work together to ensure a balance between the spectacle of racing and the preservation of the lives of the participants. Although racing remains inherently risky, the changes introduced after Dan Wheldon's death have shown that a systematic approach to safety can save lives and reduce the severity of collisions, turning tragedy into a lesson for future generations. Subsequently, projects initiated to develop additional screens, improve traction, and introduce automatic warning systems have worked as a protective mechanism. Research laboratories began to work closely with racing teams, universities, and materials manufacturers, which made it possible to create new testing standards, train rescue teams, and implement psychological support programs for the families of drivers. The memory of those who died became the driving force behind continuous improvement of procedures and serves as a reminder that every safety measure has a human face and a price that no one should ignore. These changes became a living guarantee that racing would retain its competitive spirit, but now under the protection of a more humane approach to risk. Forever,